Kelly, a warm-hearted hospital worker, couldn't bring herself to ignore the difficult old man in room 112. He was known for his sharp tongue and rigid ways, a patient no one wanted to deal with twice. Some on the staff avoided him when they could. Others rolled their eyes at the mention of his name. But Kelly saw something different behind his cold silence. A loneliness no monitor could measure, a heaviness no chart could explain. She began offering the smallest kindnesses. Nothing grand, nothing loud. Just enough to soften a room that had felt forgotten for far too long. Then one evening, a sheriff arrived at her door with a legal summons. What came next in that courtroom, the truth about the old man and why he did it, left Kelly shaken in tears and changed her and her son's life in ways she could never imagined. Hi, and welcome to Unveiled Whispers. Let's begin. Kelly paused outside room 112, her vitals cart humming quietly beside her. Morning light slipped through the small hallway window, falling across the pale door. She took a slow breath, steadying herself the way she always did before the more difficult rooms. She'd heard pieces of his story without anyone meaning to tell it. Some said he barked orders at anyone who stepped inside. Others swore he hadn't smiled once since being admitted. A few techs muttered that he watched every move you made, as if you were doing it wrong before you even started. Hospital rumors traveled fast, especially on long shifts, and room 112 carried its own gravity. Footsteps approached. Nurse Martinez slowed beside her, adjusting the strap of her med cart. "You heading in there now?" she asked quietly. Kelly nodded. "Yeah, might as well." Martinez gave a soft, sympathetic exhale. "Just take it slow. He's particular. Very particular." Another nurse passing by offered a half laugh. "Good luck, Kelly. You're everyone's favorite. Maybe you'll break the curse." Kelly managed a small smile. "I'll try not to make him throw anything." They chuckled with her, but the caution beneath their voices was real. Kelly turned back to the door. This job wasn't glamorous. Patient care technician, long hours, heavy work, low pay. Earlier that morning, she'd slipped Martinez the $20 she'd borrowed last week, a tiny loan to get her through a tight couple of days. Her last job still hadn't paid what they owed her, some dispute she couldn't afford to fight, and the missing money left her budget stretched thin. Every dollar mattered now. Still, she carried her shifts with steady hands and a warm presence that patients felt even before she spoke. She wasn't a nurse. She didn't make the big decisions. She was the one who checked the small things, the things that comforted people in ways charts never measured. She knocked softly and pushed the door open. "Mr. Hale?" she said gently. "It's Kelly. I'm here to take your vitals." The voice that answered came low, clipped, controlled. "If it's necessary, come in." He sat upright in the bed, back straight, despite the clear effort it cost him. Silver hair combed neatly, jaw tight. The kind of man who had spent a lifetime expecting precise order and receiving it. Yet the room around him told a different story, one of a man no one came to check on anymore. There were no flowers on the side table, no cards, no visitors' jackets thrown over the chair. Other rooms held voices, laughter, the soft comfort of families passing time together. But his felt suspended, a space lived in only by medical machines and long, quiet hours. The air carried the kind of stillness that comes from being forgotten. Just a water cup, a folded newspaper no one had opened, and the steady pulse of the monitors. Kelly moved quietly, narrating each step so he never felt startled. "I'm putting on the cuff now. You'll feel a small squeeze." He said nothing, but his eyes followed her hands, not with distrust, with habit. She adjusted his pillow without waiting to be asked, straightened the blanket near his feet, shifted the blinds a little so the sun wasn't in his eyes, moved his water within easier reach, small things, human things. For a moment, Kelly paused, watching the way he kept his eyes forward, as if refusing to need anything. She wished she could soften the room somehow, bring in a little warmth, a little company. But she wasn't sure where to begin with someone who'd built walls this high. And with her own life running on a credit card already close to maxed out, even the small gestures she imagined felt out of reach. All she could offer for now was gentleness in small pieces, hoping it reached him in ways he wouldn't show. The blood pressure cuff deflated with a soft hiss. "Good," she murmured. "Your numbers look steady today." He didn't thank her. but something in his shoulders eased. Not much, just enough for her to notice. Kelly stepped back toward the door. "If you need anything, just press the call button. I'll be nearby." When she slipped out into the hallway, Martinez was waiting with her chart. "Well?" the nurse asked. Kelly shrugged lightly. "He's just alone and in pain. Anyone would be tense." Martinez blinked, surprised by her gentleness. "Most people don't see it that way." Kelly offered a small, tired smile and began logging the vitals. Behind her, through the thin hospital door, Mr. Hale watched the empty space where she'd stood. For the first time since his admission, the room felt a little less cold. Hours passed, and evening settled over the floor. The hallway lights dimmed, monitors softened their glow, and the day shift voices faded into a quieter rhythm. Kelly moved through her rounds with practiced calm. When she reached room 112 again, the familiar weight pressed gently at her chest. Not fear, just awareness. She knocked gently, just as she had that morning. From inside, the response came in the same clipped, measured tone as before. Not loud, not welcoming, simply permission given because routine required it. She pushed the door open. Mr. Hale was sitting upright, trying to read the same folded newspaper from the morning, still untouched. The small lamp near his bed flickered, outlining the strain in his posture. His jaw was tight, and though he didn't say it, the exhaustion sat plainly in his eyes. Kelly began checking his evening metrics, the ones due only once a day: blood glucose, oxygen readings, a general comfort check. As she leaned closer, she noticed something small but unmistakable. His oxygen cannula was twisted, the tubing pulled too tightly behind his ear. Gently, she lifted her hand to adjust it. Before she could touch it, his voice snapped sharp through the quiet. "Can't you see it's already digging in? Leave it." He winced as he spoke, irritation flaring more from discomfort than anger. Kelly didn't flinch. She simply held up her fingers, showing what she was doing. Loosening, not tightening. In one smooth motion, she slid the tubing back into place, easing the pressure behind his ear. The relief was instant. Mr. Hale's jaw unclenched. His gaze dropped to the blanket, shame flickering across his face, quick, unwilling, but visible. He tried to speak, stopped, swallowed hard. Pride pressed the words back down. Kelly didn't comment. She just continued quietly, straightening his blanket, nudging the blinds so the light softened, setting his water closer. The same small human touches as before. He watched her hands, but not meeting her eyes, not after snapping at her. She reached the door and paused, giving the room a final check. That's when it came, barely voiced, fragile, almost spoken, but not. Mr. Hale's lips parted as if to say something, a thank you, or perhaps more, but pride or habit held it back. Kelly turned only slightly, just enough to register the softened look in his eyes before she stepped out, closing the door with a gentle click. That night, long after her shift ended, Kelly lay in the dim quiet of her small bedroom. The ceiling fan hummed softly, shadows drifting in slow circles. Beside her, her son slept curled against her arm. But her mind wasn't anywhere in that quiet apartment. It kept circling back to room 112, to the man who never smiled, to the room with no visitors, to the sharp voice that softened only when he didn't mean it. She didn't know his story, didn't know why a man who lived by such strict discipline now sat alone in a hospital room with no flowers, no company, no familiar touch. The image clung to her, a loneliness deeper than anything she'd expected to find behind that door. These questions lingered in her mind like an echo. She should have been thinking about her own problems, the unpaid wages from her last job, the envelope of overdue notices on the counter, the silence from her ex after another argument about child custody, all the things that pressed on her every day. But tonight, none of it reached her. Only the memory of that dim room did, and the quiet apology he didn't know how to say. Her son shifted beside her, mumbling in his sleep. She brushed his hair back gently. Tomorrow was supposed to be his father's day. She hoped, just for once, things would go smoothly. They didn't. By morning, a notification blinked on her phone. School closed for the day. Unforeseen maintenance. And minutes later, a message from her ex. Can't take him today. Work. Figure it out. Kelly stood in the kitchen for a long moment, staring at the phone, heart sinking. There was no time to argue, no backup plan. She packed her son's small backpack, grabbed her badge, and left. At the hospital, she settled him in the staff break room with crayons and a snack. "Stay here," she whispered, touching his shoulder. "I'll be right down the hall. Don't wander, okay?" He nodded, eyes already drifting to his drawings. Her shift pulled her into motion. Vitals, bed checks, pages from nurses. Minutes slipped through her hands like water. Maybe 20 passed, maybe 30. Then a tech hurried toward her, breath short. "Kelly, your boy. He's not in the break room." Her stomach dropped. She searched the hall, calling his name softly, trying not to panic. Then she noticed something. Room 112's door wasn't fully closed. Her breath caught. She pushed it open and stopped. Her son sat on a stool beside Mr. Hale's bed, legs swinging. A sheet of paper lay across the man's lap, a bright, messy drawing of a superhero with a crooked grin. The boy was talking quietly, animated, pointing at the cape. And Mr. Hale, the man who hadn't smiled once since his admission, was smiling. A soft, bewildered, reluctant smile, as if he'd forgotten how but remembered just enough. Kelly moved forward instantly, hand reaching for her son. "I'm so sorry." But Mr. Hale's gaze lifted, calm, steady, unexpectedly gentle. "It's all right," he murmured. Just 3 words. But they carried something she hadn't heard from him before. Not irritation, not command, but a fragile warmth waking after a long sleep. Her son looked between them, unaware he'd stepped into something delicate and rare. Kelly exhaled, slow, shaken, and for the first time she realized there was far more behind Mr. Hale's sharp edges than anyone on that floor had ever seen. The next day, room 112 didn't feel quite the same. Kelly slipped inside with the easy familiarity of routine, chart in hand, expecting the usual guarded silence. But Mr. Hale looked up the moment she entered. Not startled, not annoyed, just aware of her presence, as if he'd been expecting it. She checked his pulse with practiced calm, the monitor clicking softly beside them. Then his voice came, low, rough, but missing the sharp edge it always carried. "Your boy won't be visiting today?" The question held no accusation, just curiosity, a small, careful interest he wasn't used to showing. Kelly paused, surprised by the softness in his tone. "No," she said quietly. "School's open again, and his father—" She stopped there. "He's with him today." Mr. Hale gave a slow nod, eyes lowering, the expression of a man who understood more than he asked, a man remembering the shape of a life that was once fuller than the hospital room he sat in now. For the rest of the morning, he stayed unusually still, not rigidly, but thoughtfully, as she finished her tasks. Something in the room felt different now. Not softened exactly, but no longer braced for impact. Later, during her break, she passed the little hospital gift shop. She should have kept walking. Her budget couldn't stretch any further, not after another week without the wages her old company still owed her, not after last night's overdue notices sitting unopened on the counter. But then she saw the crossword books. Simple, a few dollars each. Something for a mind that needed occupying. Something for a room that held nothing warm. She hesitated, felt the tug of responsibility, the guilt of spending even a small amount. And she wasn't even sure he'd accept anything from her. Kindness wasn't something he let land easily. But she kept thinking of that room, the stillness, the exhaustion in his eyes, the quiet way loneliness wrapped around him like a second blanket. A gift from her might feel like pity to him, but a gift framed as coming from her son, that he might allow. That, maybe, he could accept without feeling diminished. The decision made itself. Not pity, just warmth. She returned to room 112 with the slim booklet tucked behind her chart. Without making it a moment, she set it gently beside the folded newspaper. "My son insisted you'd like this," she said softly. "He said you look like someone who solves things." For the first time, a sound left Mr. Hale that resembled a quiet laugh, small, startled, almost disbelieving. The next day, she brought a small, potted plant. Nothing bright, nothing obvious, just something living. From him, she said again, keeping the gesture light, safe. Mr. Hale stared at it as though it required careful handling, as though accepting anything kind meant rearranging old, unused parts inside him. And the day after that, she placed a simple bookmark beside his now open newspaper, a watercolor sunrise, soft and warm. He thought your room looked a little cold. Mr. Hale didn't bristle, didn't bark, didn't offer the clipped dismissals she once expected. He simply slid the bookmark between the first 2 pages, smoothing it with a quiet precision, as if gratitude was something delicate he wasn't sure how to hold. Something in him was shifting, not loudly, not quickly, but undeniably. He began waiting for her rounds. The signs were subtle but unmistakable. His blanket folded neatly, as though preparing for inspection. The newspaper opened to a page he hadn't touched until now, the faint way he straightened when she stepped inside. During one check, he watched her adjust the cuff around his arm, then said, too casually to be accidental, "Your boy, he draws well. You should encourage that." Kelly looked up, caught off guard by the softness in his tone. "He loves it," she replied. "It's his favorite thing." Mr. Hale nodded once. "He told me you wanted to buy him new crayons, but—" He stopped. He caught himself, not because he feared saying too much, but because something in his expression shifted. A quiet, heavy concern he wasn't used to showing. Kelly blinked, surprised by the look on his face. "He told you that?" Hale didn't answer, not verbally. Instead, he held her gaze for a brief moment, steady, searching, the look of a man who sensed there was more beneath the surface and was waiting, patiently, for whatever truth she chose to offer. Kelly exhaled, the words coming out softer than she intended. "My last job at Midland Care Logistics still hasn't paid what they owe me," she said. "It's been months. I tried everything I could, but life already has enough battles. I couldn't take on another." Mr. Hale didn't respond at first, but his jaw tightened, not with irritation, but with the controlled anger of a man who believed deeply in fairness and had lived too long in a world where fairness wasn't guaranteed. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady. "Some things shouldn't be walked away from." Kelly offered him a tired, grateful smile. "Maybe. But right now, I just need to keep moving forward." He didn't argue. He only watched her, really watched her, as though seeing her fully for the first time. And in that moment, something settled quietly between them. Her kindness had reached him, and his old, disciplined heart, the one buried under years of silence and loneliness, had begun to wake. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, not quite friendship, not quite distance. Mr. Hale remained himself, reserved, composed, speaking little. But Kelly could see the shift in the small, human ways, the way he lifted his gaze when she entered, the way the room didn't feel as heavy anymore. She continued offering the same small warmth, but without repeating the earlier gestures. Sometimes, during her break, she'd bring a single-serve dessert cup from the cafeteria. Pudding, a fruit bowl, a slice of pound cake sealed in its wrapper. Nothing elaborate, nothing that violated hospital rules. Just something small that made a sterile room feel less like a holding place. She never presented it as her own doing. She simply placed it on the table with quiet ease, letting the gesture speak for itself, a continuation of the gentleness he had already begun accepting. And though he never commented, he always moved the item closer, as if acknowledging the intention without needing to show it. His recovery improved steadily. Each day, a little more strength returned to his voice, to the way he held himself. And then, one morning, Kelly arrived to find his room half-packed, nurses moving softly around him. He was being discharged. She paused in the hallway, the news settling over her like a quiet warmth. Mr. Hale was going home, not to an empty, cold room, but to something lighter than when she first met him. A small, proud ache tugged at her chest. She hadn't done much, just little things, small gestures, but they'd mattered. He had felt seen. He had felt less alone. And knowing she'd helped him reclaim even a sliver of that, it made the long, exhausting weeks feel worth something. The days that followed slipped into their old rhythm again. Work, home, sleep, repeat. No new surprises, no unexpected calls, no reason to think about room 112 other than the faint warmth it left behind. Life simply moved on, steady and quiet. A week passed. Then, one evening, after another long shift, Kelly reached the walkway to her apartment building, exhaustion settling heavily across her shoulders. She was fishing for her keys when a voice behind her made her stop. "Ma'am? Kelly Rivera?" She turned. A sheriff's deputy stood a few steps away, uniform neat, expression neutral, a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Kelly's stomach tightened. "Yes?" He nodded once, professional but not unkind. "I have documents for you. You'll need to sign to acknowledge receipt." Her pulse lurched. She stepped forward with numb fingers, signing where he pointed. He handed her a sealed envelope. Thick, official, her name printed in sharp block letters across the front. "Make sure you read that carefully," he said. "It contains a court date." Then he was gone, down the stairs, out the door, the echo of his footsteps fading into the evening. Kelly stood frozen. She locked the door behind her, set her bag down mechanically, and opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a date, a courtroom number, her name listed beside Midland Care Logistics. Her breath hitched, a summons. Fear struck first, cold and immediate, followed by something quieter, harder to define. Curiosity, a sense that something had shifted beneath her life without warning. She hadn't filed anything. She hadn't pursued the unpaid wages. She hadn't taken any legal steps at all. So how and who had set this in motion? The paper felt heavier the longer she held it, as if someone else had pulled a thread she'd abandoned months ago. She set it down slowly in the silence of her apartment. Whatever this was, someone had acted on her behalf, and she would have to walk into that courtroom to understand why. The morning of the hearing arrived with a dull, cold sky. Kelly dressed quietly, her chest tight, her mind replaying questions with no answers. She left her son with a neighbor and drove to the courthouse, palms sweating against the steering wheel. People moved through the halls with the practiced indifference of routine, lawyers, clerks, families whispering anxiously among themselves. Kelly felt out of place, small, unprepared. A clerk pointed her toward the correct courtroom. She stepped inside, heart hammering. Then she stopped. At the far end of the room, seated with dignified posture, was Mr. Hale. Not in a hospital gown, not frail, not diminished. In a crisp suit, polished shoes, hair neatly combed, a man rebuilt. Her breath caught. He turned. Their eyes met. And something warm, steady, familiar settled across his expression. Not quite a smile, but something very close. "Ms. Reyes," he said softly, inclining his head. She moved toward him on unsteady legs. "Mr. Hale, I don't understand." He gestured to the seat beside him. "You received the notice, then?" "Of course I did," she whispered, still stunned. "But why am I here? Why did—" "I asked for it." Simple words, but they hit like a heartbeat in her ears. "You asked?" she repeated, barely finding her voice. "But how?" He held her gaze, calm and unwavering. "Because injustice," he said, "doesn't correct itself." Kelly blinked, the truth struggling to settle. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, a slow, steadying breath, as a man who had lived decades in the company of law. "I spent 38 years on the bench," he said quietly. "Superior Court, Civil Division." A pause. Realization moved through Kelly like a slow, settling weight. Of course he wasn't on the bench anymore. The hospital gown, the rigid posture, the discipline carved into every word. It had all been the shape of a life he no longer stood inside. Mr. Hale wasn't just a strict, solitary patient. He was a retired judge, a man who had once lived inside courtrooms the way others lived inside their own homes. He continued, his voice returning to its steady, disciplined cadence. "I know how easily companies hide behind silence, how often people walk away because they're tired, or scared, or simply alone." Her throat tightened. "But you," her voice cracked, "you barely knew me." A flicker of something, pride, warmth, Gratitude crossed his face. "You showed me dignity when I had forgotten the shape of it," he said. "You saw a man where others saw a burden." A faint, almost embarrassed exhale. "I couldn't ignore what was done to you." Kelly swallowed hard, unable to speak. He continued, "I contacted former colleagues. They reviewed your case, and they agreed. This deserved to be heard." "But I never filed anything," Kelly whispered. "You didn't have to," he said simply. "Sometimes justice only needs a door opened. I opened it." Tears burned behind her eyes. She shook her head slowly. "You shouldn't have done all this for me." His answer was immediate, firm, resonant. "I would have done it for anyone who'd been wronged." Then, softer, "But yes, your kindness reminded me of who I used to be and what responsibility feels like." She covered her mouth with her hand. He looked away, voice dipping into that disciplined calm that once intimidated an entire hospital floor. "There is fairness due to you," he said, "and today you will receive it." A quiet beat settled between them. Nothing more needed saying. Whatever came next would unfold in the courtroom itself. The hearing was short. Midland Care Logistics folded quickly under questioning. Back pay, late fees, compensation for withheld wages, all ordered, all signed. When it ended, Kelly stepped out into the hallway, still gripping the papers, still half in disbelief. Mr. Hale waited beside the doorway, leaning lightly on a polished cane. She faced him. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. He lifted a small envelope from his coat, plain, unadorned, offered with quiet dignity. "For your son," he said simply. "A trust I set up years ago. For a child I never had. It was only gathering dust." A quiet breath. "It should be used by someone who still has a future to grow into." Kelly's lips parted, stunned. "Mr. Hale, I can't accept—" "You can," he interrupted gently, "because it isn't charity, it's continuity." His gaze steadied, carrying the weight of a life lived in discipline and loss. "My wife's been gone 8 years. We never had children. The account was meant for a life that never came to be. Let it serve one that still can." Her eyes burned. He tipped the brim of his hat, that old-fashioned gesture that now felt like a signature of who he was. "Take care of your boy, Ms. Reyes." Her voice trembled. "And who takes care of you?" A faint, real smile touched his face, the kind no hospital ever saw. "You did," he said quietly. "More than you know." He turned toward the courthouse steps, sunlight brushing the silver at his temples, and walked away with the steady dignity of a man whose path had finally straightened again. Kelly stood there, clutching both envelopes, one filled with justice, the other with quiet possibility, understanding at last. The kindness she gave had not returned as a simple favor. It had come back as respect, as gratitude, as a future she never expected someone to protect, and that, she realized, was the rarest repayment of all. If you stayed till the end, you're the kind of viewer who appreciates meaningful stories, so don't leave without hitting like and subscribing. It helps the channel, and it helps these stories reach more people. And if you want more powerful narrative stories, the next video is already waiting for you on screen. Go watch it. You'll love where it takes you.